Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, How to Integrate Effective Leave No Trace Education Methods and Tools into Outdoor Experiences for Youth. My name is Severia and I'm the Communications Manager for Transforming Youth Outdoors, also known as TYO. TYO was created to scale the impact of outdoor youth development and transform the lives of youth by providing best practices, tools, and support to individuals and organizations working with youth. We are a technology platform that enables those in the field of outdoor youth programming to learn, share, network, and build upon successes. Membership to TYO is free, and you can sign up at mytyo.org. Our webinar series, which we are doing today, is just one of the many ways that TYO connects you to experts and valuable learning opportunities from our partners in the field. As a Master Educator for Leave No Trace, it is my pleasure to welcome Andrew Leary, the National Youth Programs Manager for the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. Andrew heads the curriculum development, outcomes evaluation, and programming collaboration with the Center's youth-serving partners. Today, Andrew will introduce you to some proven methods for sharing Leave No Trace with youth and provide resources to help you in this important work. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody who was able to join. Just a quick overview of today again. The goal of today is really to leave you feeling more confident about ways to incorporate Leave No Trace education methods and tools into outdoor experiences for youth. You may be a youth educator, a teacher, or even just a parent with kids who are interested in being outside. This webinar is going to help give you resources to feel confident in what you do related to Leave No Trace. The overview today, we'll have a quick exploration of Leave No Trace and our youth education initiative, and then we'll spend the majority of our time talking about the best practices to consider when educating youth, and then we'll round it out with a discussion about the opportunities for engaging youth from the family perspective all the way to the land manager perspective. I'm guessing that if you're here on the webinar that you probably have some reference for Leave No Trace and the 7 principles. But what you may not know is that behind the 7 principles and practices is the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. We're the nonprofit organization behind the research, education, and outreach that support the 7 principles. Our organization has 13 full-time staff that are based here in our Colorado office, as well as 8 full-time educators who travel the country providing education and outreach opportunities to schools, camps, city, state, federal parklands, and other outdoor events. Our mission is to protect the outdoors by teaching and inspiring people to enjoy it responsibly. The why behind Leave No Trace dates back to park managers in the 1960s and 1970s who were faced with the impacts of people spending time in the outdoors. And while Leave No Trace has successfully educated millions of people in responsible ways to minimize their impacts, we still see negative impacts today. Impacts happen when we spend time in the outdoors, but we can do something about it. Humans generally impact the environment in 6 broad categories: wildlife impacts, vegetation impacts, water resource impacts, soil impacts, cultural resource impacts, and social impacts. Leave No Trace and the 7 principles are based in science. Our education philosophy, curriculum, and recommendations stem from empirical evidence that demonstrates that educating people, especially youth, works to curb negative impacts and build stewardship values. Since about 2015, the Center has been actively engaging young people in the areas where they encounter the outdoors. This initiative is called Leave No Trace for Every Kid. Research that we've conducted over the last 2.5 years has allowed us to validate the effectiveness of our education methods, as well as inform the development of new curriculum for educators working in camp and school environments. The initiative has become foundational for the way we approach educating youth where they meet the outdoors. So let's jump into best practices. There are going to be 3 groupings of best practices. One is a general overview, the other will be more specific to youth, and then the third is actually going to address best practices for adult youth educators. Guidelines are the way to determine a course of action. They're really meant to help people make responsible choices when spending time in the outdoors. Leave no trace is not the rules of the outdoors, and thus should not be taught as the rules. Leave no trace also isn't black and white, or yes and no. And often the answer is it depends, because leave no trace represents guidelines, not rules. The photo on the right that you can see is from a staff training that one of our camp partners put on this summer for their staff, where seasonal staff created their own list of what the 7 principles mean to their camp community. These guidelines that they brainstormed helped them to create the lens for which these camp staff would teach Leave No Trace to their campers. You can teach Leave No Trace as standalone activities or programs that explore and frame Leave No Trace. So standalone activities would be exploring outdoor ethics or really focusing in on one or a few of the 7 principles associated with Leave No Trace. But you can also frame it around an activity that kids are engaging with in the outdoors, like fishing, boating, hiking, camping, or any of the other 100 outdoor activities that engage kids. Both methods are really effective, but it's ultimately going to be up to you, knowing your group or your group of kids, to determine which one is going to be most relevant for them, which is going to bring about the most context. We'll talk about that idea of context and relevancy here in a minute. Another thing to keep in mind with Leave No Trace is that it's a spectrum. It's going to really help you as an educator to understand what that spectrum is, what it looks like, and more importantly, where your kids come into that spectrum itself. So here's our Leave No Trace spectrum. On one end, we have many impacts, and on the other end, we have few impacts. Youth, just like adults, are going to enter this spectrum at varying places. And so if you can understand that the group of kids that you're working with, or your own children, or whoever it might be, are going to enter this spectrum based on their own life experiences, the education that they've had up to this point with responsibility in the outdoors and what that means, then it's going to help you as an educator align your expectation and goals for the Leave No Trace session that you're doing with that group. From the spectrum side of things, doing anything to minimize your impact is better than doing nothing at all. If you pack out your trash, you've left no trace. If you've picked up after your pet, you've left no trace. If you've done both, then that's even better. The more you can do, the better it is. Your overarching goal when thinking about youth participants with this spectrum is that you want to move kids from the significant impact side to the fewer impact side. This might happen in one education session. This may have to happen in 5 education sessions. Again, it's completely dependent on who your group is, how long you're spending time with them, and the relevance that they have for Leave No Trace. But the more opportunities that we can give youth to interpret the values of Leave No Trace, the more successfully they're going to move along that spectrum. And they're going to move closer and closer to fewer impacts. We can't approach youth with Leave No Trace education and say, this is why it's important for you to understand this. Leave No Trace is essentially a set of values, and values are effectively conveyed through the connection to a person's life experience. With the varying outdoor activities in a backyard, local park, state park, and beyond, there are a lot of opportunities to relate responsible practices to a given situation. Context and relevancy aren't obvious to most young people, so a certain level of debrief and discussion is going to have to take place to make those connections. Engage youth with open-ended questions about their experiences and what it means moving forward. We really want to give them the opportunity to talk about why this is important. Leave No Trace is not an all or nothing concept when it comes to the 7 principles. Certainly, older youth should be able to make connection to all 7 principles, but when working with younger youth, elementary school age, being strategic with the content that you're trying to deliver will help make a more meaningful connection for them. I know when I work with a principles rather than unleashing all 7 at the same time. Some of my favorites are leave what you find, respect wildlife, and be considerate of their visitors, because that can be directly connected back to the experiences of these elementary school aged youth back at home or at school. It's really important with younger youth to connect it to their everyday environments, and those three principles that I mentioned all deal with the idea of respect and responsibility. Why is it important to leave cool artifacts and objects where we find them in nature? How do you respect your pets at home, and how is that different from how you think we should respect wildlife in the outdoors? And what does respect look like at home, at school, or at church? Does it look the same, or does it look different in the outdoors? Some people, believe it or not, don't like using props or materials when they're teaching Leave No Trace. We did a pilot study last summer in 2016 with a number of camps from around the country, and it turned out that a lot of college-age staff would prefer the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics to come up with activities that don't require props or materials. As a former camp director and certainly former camp counselor, I know the burden of having to try and gather props and resources when you have a finite amount of time during your day and are responsible for a group of kids. I get that. But in all actuality, props and activities do help engage young people's understanding of Leave No Trace. One of my favorites is the Leave No Trace question ball, which is the picture that's on the left. Essentially, it's an inflatable beach ball that has Leave No Trace related questions written on it. And you can use this as an icebreaker activity, but when you're in a circle and you throw the ball around and someone catches the ball, they're going to choose which question they'd like to answer based on which questions are underneath their thumbs. That's the basic idea of it. You can obviously adopt it depending on the group that you're working with, but this is definitely one of my favorite activities. Simple prop, it's very portable, and I've been able to use it from everything from elementary school kids all the way to adult groups. So I mentioned that some of our best practices we're going to address adult educators, and this is kind of the jumping off point for that. The first thing to keep in mind as an adult educator is really trying to switch your mindset that we're not training youth. We want to be educating youth. With my role at Leave No Trace, I get a lot of people who reach out to me daily asking, how can I train my kids in Leave No Trace? They contact us because they're trying to prepare their kids to go on a camp out, or they feel like they need to follow a checklist of required learning that should or must take place. The concept of training is a finite one, meaning that there is a designated amount of time to spend on it before moving on. There's a clear endpoint to a training. And really, from a philosophical standpoint, this doesn't work with Leave No Trace because values aren't something to learn in 1 or 2 sessions. Certainly not something that kids are going to learn in 1 or 2 sessions. It's an ongoing process. So youth educators can start framing the concept of Leave No Trace education through that education rather than the idea of training kids. The concept of 7 principles will find a place in your day-to-day interactions with youth in the outdoors. The second is to make sure that you as an educator are prepared to facilitate these experiences for youth. What's your level of Leave No Trace education? The center does offer many resources and opportunities to prepare adult leaders. And these we consider to be trainings because these are finite amount of times to prepare you to be an outdoor educator, hence why we call them trainings. There are 4 tiers of Leave No Trace training, and I'll kind of give you a quick overview of all of them. The first and really the least intensive is our online awareness workshop, which lasts about 45 minutes to an hour and offers an introduction to Leave No Trace concepts really designed for the general public. We have thousands of people take this free online awareness course each year, and it's been really successful to prepare people and give them the foundation for Leave No Trace and what they might be doing if they're professional youth educators. For our camp educators, there is a dedicated online camp awareness workshop that prepares you as a staff member to go into your camp's annual staff training so that your camp can really focus on, here's how we're going to educate our kids in the camp environment, because you already have an awareness of what's going on with Leave No Trace. The second tier of training is an in-person awareness workshop, which lasts 30 minutes to a full day, depending on the group of trainers that are providing the education or the organization that's putting on the awareness workshop. We've had millions of people attend these workshops, and they continue to be a popular way to get trained. Many of our traveling educators put on these workshops every day throughout the country. The next option is a 2-day trainer course that's taught in the field by Leave No Trace master educators. The major elements of this course is that you are given the opportunity to teach your peers and then receive feedback about your teaching style. The trainer course results in a certificate of completion that you have at the end. So in essence, this is a form of professional development. And currently, there are about 40,000 Leave No Trace trainers worldwide. The last training option is our most comprehensive, and that's our Leave No Trace Master Educator course, which is a 5-day field-based training designed specifically for educators or those interested in teaching Leave No Trace. We have about 75 master educators in the US and abroad, and this level of training can benefit any youth educator who is involved with a youth serving program, because once you become a master educator, you will then be able to lead trainer courses for your staff, to lead them in-house, scheduling kind of around the barriers that you have to training your staff. If you're interested in learning more about these courses, again, this was just kind of a quick overview. We have a ton of info on our website, lnt.org, or feel free to contact me directly, and at the end of this webinar, you'll have my contact info. So we've talked about some of the best practices for helping youth to understand Leave No Trace, and for adult educators to really help frame what it means to teach Leave No Trace. But let's look at some of the key areas where learning opportunities can happen just broadly. The first is with land management agencies. So those would be national parks, BLM land, Army Corps of Engineer run places, things like that. You folks, you may feel like you're at a disadvantage in some ways, because you're likely only interacting with a group of youth once during their visit to your park. Lots of schools, families, they take trips to parks, and it's kind of a one and done program throughout the day. But you have a few advantages over families, schools, and camps. First and foremost is the wow factor of where you are. There's a good chance that the group of youth that you're interacting with haven't been to your park before. Their interest is going to be really high even before they get to the park, because it's a novel thing for them. Seeing dramatic landscapes or new wildlife, or really any unique features in a park, is going to set kids up to be really excited about what they're doing that day. So they're going to be receptive to you as an educator. And secondly, and maybe most important resource that you have at your disposal, are actually all of the negative impacts that visitors have already made to your protected land area. Trail widening, trash and litter, graffiti, the list goes on. I would recommend using those areas as examples of what can happen when people aren't educated and Leave No Trace. Bring the kids into those areas. Let them ask questions. Let them be amazed. You can really engage youth with open-ended questions about what they think in these areas, and no matter what their formal level of Leave No Trace training is, they're going to be able to connect the dots pretty easily. So we'll move on to families. There's this idea in the academic world called nearby nature, which would be outdoor opportunities or natural areas that are nearby where somebody grows up when they're young. And this idea of nearby nature has been shown to help kids form connections with nature early on in their development. Your backyard, the local park, and in some cases state parks are examples of nearby nature. Get kids out into these areas early on and encourage them to interact with nature. Leave No Trace is not a don't touch, don't interact with nature type of program. There are responsible and there are ethical ways, and there are safe ways to touch certain trees and plants. I don't recommend that for wildlife unless you're somebody who's trained in how to handle wildlife, which might fall back to the land management agencies. Your kids are going to be excited when they get outdoors, and once they start learning things and combine that with what's going on in school or other aspects of their life, they're going to want to talk to you and engage you with what they know. And my recommendation would just try and stay as engaged as you can and pay attention, because that's going to help reinforce the idea that what they're talking about and what they're learning is important because an adult's listening to them. At school, Leave No Trace has some really easy connections to STEM education as well as language and writing. When we talk about the negative impacts that occur in the outdoors, pollution, trail widening, garbage, litter, pet waste, all of those impacts are measurable and require math and science to evaluate the number and frequency of those impacts. And so those can be great learning opportunities, but also great reflection opportunities for you to engage your kids about what they think about the exercise or what they're seeing as it relates to impacts. There's also some really obvious ties with the next generation science standards, if you're familiar with those. I could go on, there could be a whole nother webinar dedicated to STEM and NGSS, but if you're a teacher or classroom educator and looking for those resources, feel free to reach out to me here at the center. And then finally, camps and after-school programs, and I'll throw like Boy Scout, Girl Scout type programs into this as well. These types of programs are really considered to be the hallmark of positive youth development programs. And so if your program has the opportunity, if your program takes place in the outdoors, really take advantage of those opportunities on a daily basis. I know when I was a camp director and when I talked to current camp professionals, sometimes Leave No Trace is referenced like, oh, we're going to talk about Leave No Trace on that camp out that we have next Thursday, even though the camp itself is based in a wooded area or at a local park. The more that you can talk about values on a daily basis, the more they're going to carry over into other parts of that child's life. The last thing that I kind of want to leave you with are some resources so that you can feel kind of empowered and confident about what you're doing when it comes to teaching Leave No Trace to youth. The first is that beach ball question ball that I mentioned a couple slides ago. Again, this is one of my favorites, really portable. It works on a lot of different levels. It can be something that you make really complex, or it can be really fun, or it can be both. It's really up to you. But there's going to be a link sent out to you after this webinar that has the directions for this activity, as well as the complete list of questions so that you can make a ball similar to this. The next resource is our Peak Online program, which is a free interactive learning program on lnt.org, our website. And this is really great for engaging elementary school aged youth in Leave No Trace. It's really colorful, it's really interactive. It's been a widely successful program since we got it going about 5 or 6 years ago. And again, as a free resource, it really can't be beat. If you're a classroom educator, you can use this. If you're at home, you can certainly use it with your technology that you have, and encourage kids to learn about Leave No Trace through those means. This resource, Bigfoot's Playbook, is actually our newest curriculum tool, and it puts Leave No Trace through the lens of experiential education. If you're not familiar with experiential education, it's essentially an opportunity to engage really anybody, but in this case, kids and youth, in activities and initiatives and games that help unpack what it means to be ethical in the outdoors, or to unpack different ideas related to the 7 principles. This book is available through our Pro Shop on our website. And then the last resource is really intended for those of you out there who manage or direct youth serving programs where you're engaging kids in Leave No Trace education. And this is our Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation. And it's really a tool that helps organizations enhance their Leave No Trace efforts through key areas like programming, education, youth engagement, and organizational messaging. If you want to learn more about this, certainly feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. There will also be a kind of a Youth Program Accreditation 101 webinar through TYO that we're going to have on November 14th, where we're going to unpack the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation, look at the 11 standards involved with the accreditation, and then dive deeper into the process of what it means to become accredited. So mark your calendars for Tuesday, November 14th. So that about wraps up, our brief conversation about effective ways that Leave No Trace education can take place for youth, hopefully giving you some best practices and ideas as a youth educator that you can walk away with and feel confident while you're working with youth. It can be a daunting task to try and teach Leave No Trace, but these best practices as well as these education methods are the tried and true way that we here at the Center for Outdoor Ethics have taught youth and will continue to teach youth for years to come. I believe now we'll have some time for questions for any of you who had questions kind of throughout the webinar. So Severia, I will turn it back to you for kind of getting that going.
Well, thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was awesome. And for those of you interested in that next webinar, there will be a link to that webinar in the thank you follow-up email that you'll get automatically. We send that out tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar and the link to that awesome beach ball activity. So there'll be additional resources in that follow-up email that you'll get automatically. But let's get to some questions. We had some good ones. So first question, and actually there was a comment about how it's so important. They were confirming that one of the things that you had said about listening to what youth have to say and be engaged is one of the most important things. So just again, just wanted to point out that that was a really good call out, and something that you had said, Andrew, about listening and how important that is when you're teaching, is just that listening factor. But moving on to questions, there's a question about, do you have to pay for the trainer course and master educator courses?
That's a great question. Generally, yes, the trainer course and the master educator courses, those in-person multi-day trainings, usually have a cost associated with them. From the trainer course perspective, we here at the center actually don't. There are minimal fees for someone who is providing a trainer course, meaning that they're investing in the packets for participants and certificates at the end, thing like that. But it's really up to the organization that's providing that trainer course. So it's hard to say exactly what the fees are for that. The benefit to having a master educator nearby or a part of your staff or whatever it might be is that they can lead trainer courses for you at really what the lowest cost would be to source the participant packets and the certificates at the end. As far as the master educator courses, those intensive 5-day courses, we have a number of providers around the U.S. who offer those courses, the Boy Scouts being one of them, the National Outdoor Leadership School, Knowles, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and a number of others. They're going to have varying prices for their master educator courses depending on the amenities that are being kind of offered during that course. So I would say the best bet to figure out exact pricing would be to check out lnt.org and our list of current master educator courses that are being offered.
Yeah, great. Somebody had asked about where classes are, so that's a good point. If you go to the LNT website, you can find both trainer and master educator courses, and I can personally speak to both of those as well. The master educator course, if you have the 5 days, really is a fantastic course to take. It was definitely one of the highlights of my professional development career. And as far as the trainer courses, being somebody who teaches those as well, generally we're trying to keep costs as low as possible, but cover our costs. So there might be facility costs or other things in addition to those things, but they all vary a little bit. But they're generally not, the trainer courses are generally not that expensive for that 2-day course. Great. Let's see. Next question. You mentioned connecting L&T with STEM and GLE requirements. Where can they find those resources?
Yeah, so those resources are they're gonna be forthcoming here in the fall. We actually we're always kind of one step ahead with our curriculum and what we're doing. We just finished our experiential curriculum that came out in the spring, and since then we've been working on our STEM and NGSS aligned curriculum. So that's going to come out in the fall and be kind of in the realm of a citizen science program that incorporates looking at impacts and measuring them, evaluating them, and then reflecting on what they really mean. So look for those in the fall. If you're an educator who's really looking to get your teeth into it now, get in contact with me and I can send you some quick links, but we will have a formalized education curriculum coming out in the fall for that.
Great, thank you. Do any of your programs provide information or advice on teaching L&T to international audiences?
That's a great question. Again, with the different providers that we have for master educator, trainer, and even the programs that our traveling trainers provide around the country, it really depends on the organization. If you're seeking that out, there are some resources that I can point to you. I know that we've been in talks with a number of agencies that help camp staff get to the United States so that they can work during the summer, and we've been working with them to prepare their international staff with Leave No Trace, because certainly there are going to be different ways to view outdoor ethics and what responsibility means from different cultures and different places all around the globe. So there's not a defined resource out there for that, but I can point you toward those resources if you get in contact with me.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, next question. I have had students question the framework of L&T based on the idea that humans are a part of nature rather than a part of nature. I've struggled with this as well because I think that at times it feels that we try to teach that humans don't belong in the wilderness. How would you respond to a student who brings this up?
Well, I think it's important, Leave No Trace is not zero impacts. If we're leaving zero impacts, then nobody's out in the wilderness and nobody's out in the outdoors. There are impacts and things that happen in the outdoors as a result of humans that are not permanent. And so I think for the benefits that the outdoors and a wilderness experience can provide to humans and what it means from a mental health point of view, from an engagement and learning and development point of view, it's important for us to be in the outdoors. But it's also important to recognize that because we're out there, doesn't mean that every single step we take is going to be a negative impact. And that's where Leave No Trace comes in to help people, for example, when it comes to taking steps in the outdoors, understand what a durable surface is and what a non-durable surface is. And why is walking through dry grass going to be okay versus walking through wet grass, for instance. It's kind of diving into the weeds a little bit, but I've gotten those questions from kids too, and I think it's important to turn it back on them, ask them why they think humans should or shouldn't be in the outdoors, and really try and get the conversation going, especially if you feel like you don't have a confident answer or way to spin that back into the Leave No Trace teaching method.
Thank you. All right, next question. Do you have any resources for connecting Leave No Trace to positive youth development or SEL principles or best practices?
We do. Again, I can point you toward those resources if you get in touch with me. My background is in positive youth development, and so the framework that I bring into everything that I do comes from that. Leave No Trace, as it stands as an outdoor ethics education program, isn't directly tied to the idea of positive youth development or SCL, but you can use the opportunity and the activities and the example of Leave No Trace to fulfill some things as they relate to the 40 developmental assets, if you're going down that road with positive youth development or engaging social emotional learning. It's kind of similar to when people ask me what's the best way to work with groups of teenagers, because teenagers can be a tricky crowd to engage with Leave No Trace and ethics, or the other side of it is that they think they know everything, and so they give you the yeah, yeah, yeah answer. Really, Leave No Trace when working with teenagers, my favorite way, especially if you're in a school or camp type setting, anything longer than a day, is to have them learn about the 7 principles and then teach their peers about the 7 principles. Use Leave No Trace as an opportunity for them to put themselves out there to be the teacher for once. Helps with communication, certainly helps with support and feedback from non-parental adults who are there kind of framing the activity. So again, if you want more specific resources, happy to plug you into those.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Next question, how does Leave No Trace help make students environmental stewards?
Well, Leave No Trace really, again, it translates the science of minimizing impacts into something tangible that people can use as guidelines for when they go out. And so if you're thinking of it from a stewardship point of view, stewardship is really involved with proactive ways that we can, from an outdoor point of view, really support the outdoor environment as we interact with it. And so again, you have to really keep in mind that Leave No Trace represents guidelines, not rules. And so that'll help play into stewardship and the idea that nature is always going to find a way, is the simple phrase, but certainly we humans have the ability to negatively impact nature in a lot of ways. And so it's important to convey that as a steward of the outdoors, we can be empowered to make decisions that we feel are educated and help minimize impacts.
Great, thank you. So that was our last current question. Are there any other questions from those of you who are on the webinar still? If you have them, go ahead and type them in. If not, we will give you back 20 minutes of your day as a bonus. Great, well, we will start wrapping up. Andrew, I'd like to thank you again for this webinar. I think there's a lot of great resources, tools, and tips that you've shared with us for Leave No Trace and working with youth specifically. So thank you so much for that. As I mentioned earlier, we will share with you in the follow-up email the link to that awesome beach ball activity, as well as the November webinar, and a link to the recording of this webinar so that you can share it out or reference it later as needed. And it will also have Andrew's email in there, although it's also here on the screen. So if there are, quick couple more questions. Yay! Okay, any feedback on Leave No Trace for adults? I know this is focused on youth, but what about families and adults?
It's funny, adults can often be more difficult to teach Leave No Trace to because they've had a much longer time frame. So their age and the number of years they've had to really develop their values. A lot of the things, the best practices that we talked about as they relate to youth in general. So again, the guidelines based in science, impacts are real, and educating folks can really make a positive impact on areas as well. Those would be approaches that I would take for teaching adults. Again, it's similar to kids and youth. It really depends on who the group of adults is, kind of what experience do they bring into Leave No Trace. How do they spend time leisurely in the outdoors? And believe it or not, there are ways and techniques you may seemingly have adults that are on polar opposite sides of the spectrum where um, their leisure activities may seemingly conflict, but leave no traces really can be applied in all activities related to the outdoors. So as long as you know the group or the adult that you're trying to communicate with, then there can be some real strategy in there.
Cool. Thank you. All right, Andrew, do you have any closing words?
Just wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining in on the session. Again, tune in for the November session if you're interested in hearing more about the youth program accreditation. And you now have my email and contact info, so please feel free to reach out anytime if you'd like to continue the conversation or find any of the resources that I mentioned I can send your way as it relates to Leave No Trace in youth.
Great, Andrew, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who joined us for the webinar today. And we look forward to seeing you in the future on the webinars. Thanks so much.